I think every day is Politics Day, and in some ways, I guess it is. We're asking voters to make the common good their voting criteria. So every day we're thinking about you and your voting identity, but not just because we care about politics. As I heard a friend say at a rally, he was running for Congress, and he said, "I'm not running for Congress just because I love politics. I'm running because I love my neighbor." Great line. So we want you to think about politics, not just because we want you to care about politics. We're not ESPN trying to pitch sports. We're trying to say there's a way to be engaged in this world that can be helpful and beneficial to others. And your political life is part of your civic engagement. For those that are looking for a new way to be engaged and involved, that's what we do around here. So on Tuesdays, Rob and I join together to talk about what we're seeing in the world, approaching the world with an open-eyed, optimistic view, but also with an honest view of what's going on. And we want to help us find a way for our light to shine in the midst of this world. And because it's Tuesday, it's going to be politics. And we're going to chat with a person who's worked very diligently in Georgia and has worked very diligently with the Stacey Abrams project. Like, Stacey Abrams has, to some people's mind, become a synonym for voter supporter and voting rights supporting. Michael Owen's going to be with us, but that'll be a little bit later in the show. I'm in Minneapolis, standing up at my desk, committed to standing up during the podcast all week since we do this thing 5 days a week. It gives me 5 more hours on my feet, which feels pretty great. Let us know on the live stream where you are listening from and what it is that you're doing on this very fine day. And Rob, nice to see you, and good morning.
Hey there, I'm sitting down in Arkansas, but that's
sitting is the new smoking, Rob. You're also a cigar smoker, so we could actually have you do both if we wanted to.
That's right. Well, I don't think they'd let me in the office here, but you know how it is. So we talked last week about me going to the Sam's Club to get vaccinated. A little vaccine update for you.
Yeah, how'd it go?
It hurts.
Really? Truly?
Oh, yeah, truly. Like, true significant arm pain. No other symptoms, thankfully. Other people have had different symptoms, but for me and my wife both, it was pretty significant arm pain right around the spot of the shot. It felt like you should have a big nasty bruise there, but you don't. It's just some crazy pain. So, but we got shot number 1 of the Moderna, or Team Moderna, apparently. I don't. I imagine that people are going to be. I think there's probably going to be some weird brand loyalty that happens with these vaccines. Don't you think? Have you ever known the name brand of a vaccine before, Doug?
No, but I will say I've never. Maybe when I was a child, but in my known life, I've never had one of those kinds of shots. I've never had a flu shot. I don't know who makes.
Yeah, I've never had a flu shot either.
I've had a tetanus shot, and truthfully, I had no idea who the manufacturer of my tetanus shot was. I don't know.
My last tetanus shot, I was at my doctor's having kind of my annual checkup or whatever, and he said to me, "Have you had a tetanus shot in the last 10 years?" This was a couple months ago, and I said, "Dr. Nolan, you've been my doctor for the last 12 years. That little computer you're looking at, it should tell you whether or not I've had a tetanus shot." So, yes, but glad to report that no significant side effects other than a little pain in the arm. But we're Team Moderna. I feel like Team Johnson & Johnson is going to look down on everyone because they get that one-shot thing. They don't have to go back again. I feel
like it's the other way. I hope to get the Johnson & Johnson just because it feels like that's like the less
it's less effective. One. Yes, it's less effective. It's less effective, but you only have to get one shot, and I think there's something to that. So I'll be going back April 8th to get the second shot. Have you seen these reports? Speaking of politics and coronavirus, though that shouldn't be a political thing, but it has been. The craziness that's happening in Europe, it looks like that. There's questions about vaccines in Europe, particularly the one that's not yet available in the U.S. The I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're right there with me.
Fanciest name.
Oh,
I mean, if I could
Exactly.
get one just based on the name, AstraZeneca, that's the one I
Yeah.
would want.
Yeah, the
If I was
problem
just
is that
picking one.
apparently there's many people in Europe that are developing blood clots after getting that vaccine, and they've suspended using it in several countries. And this is not good timing because it seems like the coronavirus is they're talking about a third peak, a third wave happening in Europe. Hopefully, we're going to be able to stem that tide here in the United States, as we continue to ramp up the vaccine availability for folks. But it it felt for a moment like we were out of the woods with the coronavirus,
Yeah.
and I had that feeling that, like, okay, well, we're not quite through this, but on to the next thing. I worry that that might not be the case.
Well, I think it's going to be a slower journey out of this woods. It's going to be like we're as somebody who's walked in the woods, sometimes you just start together and then you run into a little swampy area, a little bog right before you get out. It slows you down and the feet get wet. And that feels like what it is. We can see it from here. But look, Europe has been notoriously nervous about vaccines and any kind of work around the response to COVID. It hasn't shined all across Europe. Especially in the Union, and it's. I heard today, and we won't spend all day because we spent Friday and Monday talking about vaccines and coronavirus.
Oh,
that the blood clotting.
Maybe I should start listening to the other days of the podcast.
That's right. That's right. That the blood clotting is not all that rampant. In fact, it's no more than you would see in just typical numbers. At least this is what the WHO is saying. So now there's a big political. Cultural argument about if vaccines are dangerous, and it's going to be that's what's going to spread, right? Is that people are going to start to say, oh no, they've now proven that the vaccines are dangerous, and then that will support people who want to be sure that people are warned properly, and whether or not that's proper warning or fear mongering, I don't know. But speaking of fear mongering, it's 596 days until our next election in the United States on November 2nd, 2022. So that's only 596 days, which is a long time, of course. And on the other hand, people are not going to be thinking about totally different things in 596 days. Like the frame of how people are going to be thinking about voting is going to be in front of us, looking an awful lot like it does today, right? With people still feeling very much the way that they're feeling now. So while a lot of people are saying, and I hear this from friends all the time, like, oh my gosh, it's got to be so hard for you to be in like the vote common good world when people don't want to hear about the next election. They don't want to hear about voting because it feels like we just had one, right? It's like somebody saying, after that big Thanksgiving meal that you eat, someone's like, hey, what are we having for breakfast tomorrow? And you're like, oh, could we just not talk about food for a little bit? Like I'm currently stuffed with this one. I think a lot of us just feel overwhelmed and just want a break and want the virus to go away. And we want summer to come and the kind of this relief to be in the air, and then some people are like, hey, have you thought about the laws that are going to set the conditions for our next votes? Be like, oh my gosh, I wish other people would just care for that. Here's the good news. We're going to be talking to somebody today who's actually thinking some people are taking care of all this business, so you don't have to, right? That kind of situation is clearly in front of us. And so as we think about, the political issue, the cultural issues that become part of our political discourse, it's time to start sorting that stuff out. And to your point, Rob, we're not going to be done. We're not going to be totally out of the woods coronavirus related. Like we may have solved whatever the virus vaccine relationship is going to be. But man, this is still going to be hot and heavy. Those stimulus checks are going to be moving. This increase in the child earned tax credit, this $3,600 redistribution to the poorest of people and to the middle class people and to others is going to be hot and heavy. I don't know if you've seen the money land in your bank account yet. Have you? Have you checked your bank account?
Saturday morning, we got our deposit of our stimulus check, which was shockingly efficient. From the, I said to my wife on Saturday morning as we were heading to Sam's Club to get our vaccine, he signed the bill on Thursday, and we got the money this morning. It was incredible. But I'll tell you, I don't know, Doug, if you realize this, but one of the big victories in this stimulus package is the last two stimulus packages left out college students who are dependents. So if it hit the age of 7, once you hit which you're over the age of 17, you did not get any kind of stimulus money if you were still a dependent, which means, I don't know, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of college students were left out of
and this
that.
Isn't just college students. This, you're saying somebody who's over the age of 18 and doesn't file on their own taxes. That class of people. Is that right?
Yes.
It's not just people not in college.
Right. If you're still that's the most common category of people that would fall into that. But but disabled folks and a whole host of people that are over the age of 17 and yet are still dependents didn't get stimulus money. And that gap that got filled, that hole got closed, and which is a really good thing, especially in my house where I have two college students that fall into that category, and they are now trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to do with this $1,400? But when you think about like who is the most
in the Ryerson family, is that their money? Is that
that's
money?
their money. No, that's their money.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good.
Yeah, that's
good.
their
Because
money.
the government decided they don't get money, you do. So I'm glad.
Right. Yeah. Now
you're running your own little redistribution program over there.
Now the two younger people in the family, that's not
how are they spending?
We're not giving the 6-year-old $1,400. But what it's done though is that college students are amongst the most vulnerable people in our society. Like in terms of, so many of them are, living paycheck to paycheck, living student loan to student loan to kind of keep things going. And I'm just really glad that the Democrats fixed a problem in the stimulus packages that we had previously.
So I don't even know. In addition to the earned child income tax credit boost that hasn't yet been delivered out, because the IRS has to figure that part out. Do children in your family? I don't have any children living in my family, and so I don't know this.
So
did they get money from this? Direct
so the
stimulus?
the first stimulus, you got $500 per child. The second stimulus, you got $300 per child. This stimulus, you get $1,400 per child.
That must have been the largest deposit that the Ryerson bank account has seen in quite some time. That was a boon. That was a big day. Congratulations. Really, it's $1,400 for every human being in America.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Wow. Well.
Yeah.
Hot diggity. Yeah. Good for us in this country.
Yeah.
And I will just say, as somebody who thinks that this is one of the ways that the government should interact with its citizenry is to make direct payments into people's bank accounts through base minimum income, which we should have a whole conversation about sometime. I was in a chat with a friend last night, and he said, "Do you mean UBI?" And I said, "Well, that's one version." And it turns out that in that whole conversation between universal base income and base minimum income, those two different phrases are actually brand names for different approaches to this. Who knew?
Uh,
Who knew?
of
So we should have
course.
that conversation. But what we're finding out is that there's actually a role for a competent federal government. So people that feel
Exactly.
like the government can't do anything good and right. Well, I sure hope
Yep.
that it does, and I hope that our
Yep.
response in COVID is comparable between the way things were a year ago and how things sit now. And even though Congress responded with with due diligence a year ago, they were putting together the first $2 trillion payment out, and we're having to figure out how to save the economy while the country was needing to shut down because of people just staying home. Now people are figuring out how to get back out, and that's a
Yep.
different way for the government to respond. And if the Republicans had had their way, for the most part, money may have gone to some states or to some counties or some vaccine support, but that would have been it. Not to be too blunt about it, but if Republicans had had their way, Mitch McConnell and all, if in the November election, if Ossoff in Georgia had not just squeaked in to making it into a special election, in that one little election, he wouldn't have had a special runoff, and it would have been a Republican majority. So those people that turned out in November, not the January election in Georgia, which we'll be talking about in a bit when Michael Owens joins us, but the one in November. And if in Georgia, if you don't get 50% as a statewide representative, then it moves to a statewide candidate. Then it moves to a second special runoff. And Ossoff, who was the Democrat, was running against Perdue, who's the Republican, and Perdue was above 50% and then just dipped below. I don't remember the exact number. I bet you when Michael's on, he'll be able to tell us, but it was like 49.8% or something, like a countable number, the difference between having a special election that then Ossoff went off and won versus so a small number of people in Georgia, what they did created the conditions by which the American economy, I believe, is rescued, and a new role for the federal government, I believe, going forward for the next decade or two, was launched with this bill, because we are never going back to giving families less money for children than we did in this moment. Like, this is why Democrats are excited and why Republicans are terrified, and they call it the greatest, wish list for progressives, because it's very difficult for politicians to pull away from giving money and giving support to children that they gave them last year and can look back and say, here's what it did to help those children, and to move 20% of children out of poverty and into a more sustainable way of life is so consequential. It's going to end up, I think, being just massively important. And all of that, was rooted to who our elected officials are. As we like to say around Vote Common Good, Rob, if you want to change policy, change the policymaker.
Exactly.
Your best bet is just to get somebody else in there to do something different.
That's right. Speaking of getting somebody else in there, Doug, you and I for I don't know, better part of a year, had a little podcast that we called "This Guy's Got to Go," in which we chronicled on a periodic basis all of the reasons why Donald Trump no longer should be the president of the United States, and we were happy not just to complain about that, but to work towards that. And you might remember that one of the things that I used to rant about on the "This Guy's Got to Go" podcast, it would get me so wound up, is the reality that one of the chief functions of the president of the United States is to be the comforter in chief. That in times of national trial, in times of national heartbreak, that we need a president who stands before us and speaks understanding, empathetic words that give comfort and give help and kind of shine a light forward of where we're going. And one of the things that absolutely drove me nuts about Donald Trump is that he did not do this. He had so many opportunities, and especially in the midst of the pandemic, to step up and to show some empathy for the hundreds of thousands of families that lost loved ones in the midst of his administration. And he simply didn't do it. And it was mind-boggling because it felt like it was a political layup to take that approach, and he simply didn't do it. He continuously made it about himself. Last week, near the end of the week, Joe Biden addressed the nation, and on our coronaversary, and I got to tell you, he won me over. He won me over simply because he did that thing that we had not had in 4 years. He was the comforter in chief. He stood before us and talked about what we've gone through as a nation over the last year. He spoke with empathy and understanding and compassion, but he also told the truth. He didn't make it about himself. He said things like, we're going to, we passed this bill. We think it's going to make a difference, but if parts of it fail, I'm going to tell you that they failed. And it was refreshing and poetic and wonderful. And listen, I mean, you know this, Doug. I'm not the world's biggest Joe Biden fan. I've said often that I never dreamed I would work so hard to get a president elected that I barely want to be president. And I've not
to be clear for your side. To be clear, so people understand.
I'm a Bernie guy.
You wanted somebody to be more progressive than Joe Biden. Some of your beef was that he didn't approach it with enough of a progressive attitude. So you're not one of these like I didn't want Trump, but boy, Biden goes too far. I'm no fan of Biden. You were the other way. You thought he should be more like the other person that people didn't want to be president than the one that they did. So you really wanted him to be more progressive, not less progressive.
Yes.
So go on. I just for people who aren't yet familiar with the Robb Ryerson demand of Joe Biden.
That is a weird matrix of beliefs that are wrapped up inside of me.
Right. The Republican who says the thing I don't like about Joe Biden is he's not progressive enough.
Yes.
That's a small group of people that you find yourself in.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I completely understand that, being a Republican who's also a Bernie Sanders guy, makes me a party of one, but that's all right. But Joe Biden was so and listen, I am still going to have policy critiques of Joe Biden. I am still going to have things that I like. Like in the future, he's going to do things, and he is doing things currently that frustrate me. But he won me over with that speech. I am now in his corner because he did that thing that presidents need to do. And that is to be the comforter in chief for the nation. And it was Reagan-esque. It was absolutely fantastic. And I'm on board.
And to those who wonder, speeches that are made like what Joe Biden gave last week, I think on Thursday. Yes, they're written by speechwriters, right? You'll hear this, and I've been hearing this, like anybody can stand in front of a teleprompter and read it. But there's nothing on that teleprompter that the system of Joe Biden's administration didn't want to put on the teleprompter, right? That's the whole point, is that it's he's saying the things poetically and in a very well-structured speech, which just is great to see again, right? The use of oratory power. And that's what he wanted in the speech, right? And what's different than what we saw in the last 4 years with the failed twice impeached loser president was he would read off the teleprompter, but then would make little asides that would undercut what was written on the teleprompter, right? That's another way to do it. You had this sense that what Joe Biden saw on the teleprompter and read was the best articulation of what he thinks. Now, more cynical people will disagree with that and say, no, he's just reading the lines. Well, I think he gave the attitude that he believes this and that he really wants
Mhm.
this to be true and that he actually really does personally care. And I'm with you. I think being a representative form of democracy, especially with the presidency, which is a unique role in all of our government, but
Mhm.
in anybody who takes on the role of representing another group of people, that the ability of that person to actually care about and connect with the people and not just be policy wonks, not
Yeah.
just care about policy. And in the political world, there's always this debate between should we be more policy or should we be more politician driven? And that's if you've ever canoed
Mhm.
in a canoe, you have to paddle on one side and then paddle on the other, right? And sometimes we need to be much more policy driven. And there's a lot of people who their view of politics is through policy. But then there's politicians who transcend that. And frankly, Joe Biden does that. And so did Donald Trump. It was not about policy with that guy. People were not
Right.
supporting him because they bought into his view of the world. It's they said he gets me and he represents me and he connects with me. And I hear you saying that's what Joe Biden did here, that
Yeah.
there's a sense in which the person, the politician, the representative is the one that felt like there was this deep connection to what you wanted someone in that job, in that role to do.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely the case. And so, it'll be, hopefully there will be few opportunities for him to have to do those kinds of speeches.
Mm.
But I feel a sense of calm knowing that,
Mm.
if we do go through more tragedy as a nation, that we're in the hands of someone who cares, and
Yeah.
that's not to again, it's not to say that I agree with everything he's going to do, but I am not questioning his motives.
Yeah.
I really believe like he cares.
That's taking me down memory lane. I remember back in 2000, thinking about George Bush when he became president, and his presidency felt like somebody who was young and not up to the job, was going to have to grow into it. Didn't have I think the phrase back then in 2000 was he didn't have the
Gravitas.
gravitas. Yeah.
Mhm.
Gravitas. He didn't have the gravitas. But he had this like empathetic thing going all the
Yeah.
time. This is before September 11th.
Mhm.
And I remember saying to Shelley, I think George Bush like wants to be the country's pastor. I don't know that we need someone to like
Yeah.
be their pastor, right? Because there was this period of time where there was all this argument about what you could do with stem cells in research. Remember that? And there was
Yes.
the life support question. There were these ethical questions, and I remember thinking like, the guy's got to get on with his work. Like if he wants to be the country's pastor, and then I realized, wow, that's a really important function and role. And it was hard to imagine what it would. I was sort of taking it for granted, that piece, right?
Yeah.
Until the last
Yes.
4 years. And frankly, I'm
Yeah.
a big Obama supporter too, but I'm not sure Obama always had that same level of empathic connection, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think people were very connected to him. I certainly was. Thought he did good things. Thought his oratory and his leadership was great. But there was something, didn't feel quite the kind of warmth from the person in that role. It felt a little bit more autocratic, right? Like we're going to solve this with the right policy, which a lot of people really, really preferred. And now after all these years, you kind of feel like, oh my gosh, this is what it could feel like if the person in that role is extending themselves as a person. As a person.
Yeah. And we have a very specific group of people to thank for having Joe Biden in the White House as opposed to Donald Trump. And those are the people of Georgia. And that leads us to kind of welcoming our guest today, Michael Owens. Michael's a friend of mine and has been a longtime activist and leader in the state of Georgia. And we really wanted to have a conversation with Michael about, what is going on in Georgia for those of us that kind of see the headlines and see these kind of crazy news stories like voter suppression laws are being passed and you're not going to be able to hand somebody a bottle of water if they're in line to vote in Georgia and things like this. And we're like, oh, wait a minute, what is going on down there? So Michael, thanks for being with us today. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us. It's great to see you. Curious if you can kind of bring us up to speed on the work of the Republicans in the Georgia legislature that seem, at least from the outside, seem to be passing laws that will make it harder for people to vote instead of easier.
So first of all, thanks, Rob, for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, Michael, we're not really hearing you. I think your mic is not fully on, or we're not picking it all up. You're not on mute. That's not the problem. We can hear a little bit. Yep. It's just real soft. Oh, sounded like we had a little magic there. Hey, Dan, can you pop him off screen and see if you can talk to him, help him get his mic fixed, and then we'll let him jump back on? Oh, that's sounding better. That's sounding better. It sounds like your headphone. Maybe the mic is in your headphones.
Can you hear me now?
Unfortunately, no. I'm just very faintly.
Yep.
Hey, Dan, are you able to? There we go. Okay. So I think Dan will figure that out. That's no better.
Hello?
No, he's okay. We're getting there.
All right. Michael, you with us now?
Give me 1 sec.
That's sounding a little better though. I mean, this is worth the wait. This is fun. This is like the suspense builds.
Yeah, I think I'm here.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Good to hear you.
So tell us tell us what's going on in Georgia with these kind of voter suppression laws that are on the table in the Georgia legislature.
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me, Rob. I do appreciate it. Sorry about the technical difficulties. It's a land of COVID and everyone's switching between platforms back and forth. But first and foremost, there have been no laws passed thus far, which is a good thing, right? These are all proposed bills that the Georgia legislature, Republicans' Georgia legislature has come up. And the simple answer, Rob, is because they want to stay in power. I mean, they want to continue to win elections in a state that is continuing to push, to empower more people and to allow more people's votes to count. Remember, this all started with the large push years ago now to get more voters in Georgia on the rolls, right? To get more people signed up, registered to vote. And it's insane that we're at this point with everything going on when the major impetus to begin with has been able to empower more people to join in their right to vote. That's really is the heart of what we're talking about. And, much is to be said and praised about Stacey Abrams and her work that honestly, it's been going on for years around voter registration and getting people elected to vote. So the real issue should be, where's the policies around where people stand, where they want to vote, not trying to curtail who should be able to vote and who not should be able to vote, right? So that's kind of the crux of where we're at. And instead of focusing on policy that individuals can get behind when different candidates run for office, it's unfortunate that the Republican Party at this time has chose to do the opposite and just focus on limiting people's access to the polls. So that's really what's led us here ultimately. They want to continue to win races in a state to where it's becoming abundantly clear that the policies that people want to support are those that most Republicans, at least elected Republicans, are not upholding. So where does that leave us? What's happened? This is not new per se. I mean, there was our Secretary of State and Governor had launched a voter, make sure I get it right, a voter fraud task force long before the last year's election. it's kind of like let's have a solution and go out and find the problem for it, right? Because the bottom line is this: voter fraud does not exist in these kind of numbers in this state, and nothing that we've been able to do shows that. And people know, the Secretary of State knows it, which is why we've had this big issue with him and former President Trump about that. There was, after the election, there was a recount. There was a hand recount. In my county, Cobb County, which is the third largest county in the state, there was a recount that was done on the signature matching, and it showed that 99.99% accuracy. 99.9%. I mean, and this is after like 3 rounds of audits and recounts and all this. So the bottom line is that we know there is not sufficient voter fraud of any type that would lead to any of these bills. And I think at last count, there were 12 bills, I think, at crossover day that passed out of the House and going over to our Georgia Senate right now. So it's unfortunate, but at the end of the day, the clearest, thing that I can tell to everybody across the country is that the Republicans hold the majority in our state House and state Senate, and they want to remain in power. So in order to do so, they are deciding to do these things. We talk specifically about the bills, but the large scale of things, they want to reduce the number of people that can vote and get to the polls. It's it's a shame.
So one of the bills in particular that has been kind of on the table is this idea that this bill that would make it more difficult, or you would be unable to get an absentee ballot unless you had a reason, an excuse. It's called no excuse absentee ballots. And one of the things that happened during coronavirus is that during the pandemic was that many states kind of loosened their rules about what qualified you to get an absentee ballot, making it easier for people to get them, making it easier for people to therefore to vote by mail. And so this is kind of trying to pull the reins in on that and say, well, listen, you can't just get an absentee ballot for any old reason or no reason at all. You've got to have some good reason. What does that do? How does that disenfranchise voters? Like what's the impact of that? How does that work in terms of like suppressing votes?
Sure. So to put that in context of what you're talking about, you really have to look at it in multiple different layers, right? So first of all, this isn't new to Georgia. Georgia has had the ability for anyone to vote by mail for quite some time now. So it's not new. And the Republicans have been very supportive of it. As a matter of fact, at one point in time, not too long ago, they were actually using that much more than than Democrats were in the past. So in other areas, like being able to register to vote online was something that the Republican governor, now Brian Kemp, when he was Secretary of State, that he put in. So, I want to make clear that these are not like Democratic measures that are trying to be pushed through. These, in a lot of instances, were Republican measures that they had absolutely zero problem with when their voters were the majority of the ones using these. So again, you got to put this in context with where we are in time and shifts that are taking place. In this past November election and in the primaries of last year, you also have to think about within the realms of COVID, right? Of course. And it was the Secretary of State's office, again, held by a Republican, who decided to send an absentee ballot, not just to send a request for absentee, because even though people could before, I think absentee voting had been used in Georgia about 7%, I'd say. But in the midst of COVID, and then you had the Secretary of State decide he's going to send an absentee ballot request to every person, registered voter on the rolls. That obviously changes the dynamics. And in a state that, again, is quickly shifting towards blue, there was many people in the Republican Party that was horrified by this. Because one thing that's been shown time and time again is that, at least within this state, is when people, in a large scale, when voter access is opened up, more people vote, which means those people who have historically been disenfranchised now get the opportunity to vote. The numbers start to level out, right? And this state has been long sequestered within this, we're talking around voter suppression, because it has been used like a surgical needle or a knife across the state to literally carve out areas where we know that there's high numbers of majority voters in whatever ways to disenfranchise them to vote. So when you're talking about things such as vote by mail, you give people access to be able to vote that may not or may be challenged in other areas to vote, such as people where, in conjunction with doing this, there have also been many voting precincts that have been shut down across the state. And the vast majority of those polling locations that have been shut down has been in minority areas, right? So now you take away the polling locations or just move them, and you move a polling location, 5 or 10 miles down the road, it's definitely going to impact people who do not have their own transportation, or you move them away from areas that don't have public transportation anymore. So those polls aren't along those. And just the confusion, right? Where some people used to go into the polls for 20 years. Now all of a sudden it's changed. That's going to be impactful as well. So, Rob, it's not always, the letter of the law that you can look at and go, oh, well, this is voter suppression or this is racist. You really have to peel the onion back a little bit and go, okay, this legislation may be on the table, but what is the impact of it, right? And does it impact certain communities or certain demographics disproportionately to others? And that's really the key to looking at laws like this.
Hey, Michael, I want to ask you, there are 48 states that currently have bills in their legislatures to limit or change voting access. That tells me that there's a unified effort across the Republican system and a lot of people don't know that sometimes groups will put together bills and then deliver those to the legislators to offer up, just change the name, and add sponsor here and insert them. So my question is that what's going on? Is there a concentrated effort to craft bills by groups outside of every state and then deliver those to Republican legislators in order to push bills through, so that people understand that what you're talking about in Georgia, if this is true, it's not just a Georgia problem. It's an every state problem, and they're trying to create a context nationally that claims that there's a problem with voting. Is that what's happening, or is this more particular to certain legislatures in some states?
Well, I don't know for a fact, right? So it's a bit of conjecture. But we do know that these type things happen, right? I mean, and you can see them happen in various different sessions. You saw that with the abortion bills, right? That was going across the states last session. You see that this year, where I think at least 18 different states have some sort of bills that would impose stricter voter ID laws. So, I think to the heart of your question, yes, without a doubt. And even if, to the extent that there's some nefarious group in the background kind of pulling the strings, different states pay attention to what other states are doing, particularly in areas, Georgia and Arizona and Texas, and areas that may be on the cusp, right, of flipping blue, if you will. And this is the heart and soul of, this is voting, right? This is about voting. So, and you're talking about people making bills, that depends on how many votes turn out. So, it's always better, not that it's morally right, but it's always better that instead of people choosing, their elected officials, if elected officials can choose who votes for them, right? And that's what we're seeing in this case. So of course there are these bills are kind of traveling across the country, and they get renamed, or there's a twitch here or there to slightly change it. But at the heart of it, it's the same thing. It's about trying to disenfranchise voters. And I think when we talk about voter suppression, we also have to understand, and it's one thing too to look at the flavor of these different bills, is that all the different various aspects that go into voter suppression, right? And it's not simply list a textbook that's there. There's many different ways that when crafted, you can go after, and really you're targeting. I mean, we really think about it, right? We are targeting specific areas and ways to disenfranchise people to show up at the polls.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting how these different things kind of work together. So, you mentioned limiting and removing polling places, and the impact of that is longer lines at polling places.
That's
So
right.
people have to stand in line longer, and then you layer on top of that now this law that would make it illegal to hold the line, which is a really common thing that campaigns do, that different organizations do. Vote Common Good has done in the past. We were serving lunch to people standing in line to vote in Georgia, and that. So I mean, this is something we have done, and so now like people have to wait in line. It's a long time, and now like the giving them a little bit of creature comfort while they're in line to keep them in line, that is being taken away or attempted to be taken away. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, this seems to me like a particularly cruel bill, like it's an unnecessary bill, and it's unnecessarily cruel. Like, you can't give a bottle of water to somebody standing in line. Come on. And this is hey, don't tread on me, this is a free country crowd. Like, come on.
Exactly. Yeah. I've worked on some of those same initiatives. I worked with the World Central Kitchen on what they call Chefs to the Polls. Yeah. And, I'd also talk with, various election directors in different counties throughout the state during the process. Because you're right, Rob, it's not anything new. And we know with the long lines, again, it's going to impact a certain demographic more than others, right? There are some people that are literally taken off work and they've got an hour or two and they've got to go clock back in. And if they show up and that line is around the corner, they're not going to vote, right? Where some people that are more fortunate, they just take the afternoon off, or they don't clock in or clock out. So you know what? They've got to catch back up with some emails, but it's okay if they have to sit in line for 4 or 5 hours. So again, another example as to where we know that certain laws are going to impact certain people more so than others. And this idea about we are trying to somehow entice people to go to the polls by offering them a taco, or a hot dog or something to drink. It's foolish, right? It's absolutely absurd. I mean, who's going to go stand in line for 4 hours to get a hot dog? I mean, that's not the way this works. But what we did was we made sure that we followed existing law, right? We made sure that, again, we had discussions with election officials across the state, and there was no laws that were being broken. Therefore, you now have to, as you said, you have to go out and contrive these cruel, totally unnecessary laws to further hammer out the impact that you want to have. Because if you're going to put a law, if you're going to create a hostile environment that makes it hard for people to vote, we're going to do everything we can to help those people that are voting, by offering some comfort while they're in line. And so the response to that is then let's create a law to stop that. So it's this vicious cycle. And to me, it just shows how committed they are to ensuring that the stranglehold of power they've had will remain intact. Souls to the polls is another one, which is a direct correlation to Sunday voting that you see. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, throughout the past decade, the past 6 years, I've worked extremely hard in ensuring that we can have expanded access to the polls. I mean, I've crunched numbers around municipalities, and even in my county, when I was the former chairman of the Democratic Party in Cobb County, found out that we had less contact hours than almost anywhere in the state per capita. But again, a long-time Republican state, and found out that the election board just wasn't funded really to keep a lot of these election places open, or we were only getting one Saturday out of the entire early voting time where people go vote. And we never had Sunday voting, right? Because it was understood very early that the Sunday pushes to what we call souls to the polls is something that really turns out a lot of Democratic vote. I mean, it's popular within the African American churches to do so. So what do? You go in and you surgically say there can be no Sunday voting. Well, that is obviously going to have a direct impact on a voting apparatus that communities throughout the state have used to mobilize minority voting. So again, another perfect example. So when Stacey Abrams says that this is just a redux of Jim Crow, you have to listen and really understand she chose those words on purpose, right? Really to call to light what's going on here and just how insidious, just pure insidious these bills are and what they're really trying to get to.
Yeah.
It seems like, Michael, that there's sort of two sides to this: the people who want to vote and how easy it is for them to exercise that right that they want to exercise. Then there's the context where people aren't sure if they want to vote or they don't want to vote, and getting people to consider their voting option and to act on it. How do these laws, it's pretty clear, and you've done a great job of explaining, I think a lot of us sort of intuitively know how you restrict people who want to vote by making it harder for them to. But how also do these kinds of laws impact the people who don't want to vote or don't know if they want to vote? What's the impact on that group of, what in some places could be 40 or 50% of the available voting population?
Yeah, I think there's voter apathy all different types of ways, right? And when looking at these bills, I think it just turns people off to politics and voting just more. I don't know that there's a shift left or shift right when it comes to this type of thing. It's more just less that growing middle of people that are just disgusted with politics, and again, not talking about policy per se, really just talking about politics and going, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of the left. I'm sick of the right. If you can't get my vote, then you don't care if I vote or not, really. And but that's where I really try to go back to the heart of this, and it's about it's your choice whether you want to go vote or not. And if you choose to exercise that vote, fine. If you choose not to, that's up to you. But if at any point in time that you decide you want to, you should be able to. And and before all these bills came up, right? Georgia was in the national news a couple of years back talking about kicking people off the voter rolls, because then the solution was, well, if you have not voted, then we're just going to kick you off, right? Or we're going to find ways we can. So it was just another different flavor then of voting rights. And I think Robb had said, we're talking about the people that are like, all for your rights and don't tread on me, and but then to say, hey, it's my right. It also should be my right not to vote. Now, I always will encourage people to go vote, but it is your right not to vote. And I have a thought around this, that if I choose not to vote, that should not disenfranchise me from voting later on. And because I have not chosen to vote, doesn't mean I'm dead. It doesn't mean I have left the state. It doesn't mean like I've signed away my constitutional right to vote. It simply means I chose not to vote in this election. And so to be kicked off the voter roll because I choose not to vote is another oxymoron, right? It's kind of crazy. Voting rights need to be protected on both sides: the right to vote, but also the right not to vote if I choose to. And so it's weird as people are saying, hey, voter rights activists and ensuring that, going out and getting people to vote. But the same has to be true on the opposite side as well. You have to protect those rights of people who actively choose not to vote. And if they're just kind of ticked off about the way things are going right now and they choose not to vote, that has to be okay, and they have to be protected as well.
Yeah. Michael, so
are laws in Georgia that are still trying to pursue this clear the voter rolls? Is that an active legislation that's being considered right now?
It always is. We would like to get it modified as well. So the big thing is that, and again, a lot of times the devil's in the details, right? It's about how these things are carried out. Face value, it looks fine. However, if you are sent basically a voter update card and says, hey, you moved, you potentially now outside the district or out of the state, And I could move from last time I moved personally. I moved 1 mile away, still within the same district. If I receive a card saying, "Hey, you've moved," and I don't fill that out, I'm going to be removed from the rolls.
Wow.
No.
Wow.
I mean, again, it doesn't mean that because I moved out of the district or I moved out of state. And furthermore, we're so much further advanced in all realms of technology. If nothing else, check the obituary. Remove people from the rolls when you read the obituary, right? I mean, there are ways in which we can go about this. Yeah, I mean, connect with vital records. That's a simple no-brainer, right? You were saying, you want to make sure that it sounds a little terse. I'm sorry, but you want to make sure that dead people aren't voting. Connect the voting rolls with the vital records. I mean, it's just that simple. Right. So we're making this overly complicated on purpose, just like the voter ID match, right? They're going through now. It's not really hard if financial institutions can find ways of doing it. If the Equifaxes and TransUnions of the world can find ways to match you and I amongst anything we do, right? Then we can find technological solutions to this, but they don't, because something like, again, voter ID match sounds innocuous, but it's all about being able to throw out votes from people who have hyphens in their names, who have accents above, use non-standard English names. And we know who that's going to impact far more than others. So when you have something like, voter ID match, it's not to make sure that fraud is going on. The true purpose behind it is to be able to disenfranchise, African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, whose names much more are going to use non-standard English vernacular and letters when it comes to their language. And we see a lot of systems that get built and get designed where, to use the, I'm thinking about it from a Hispanic standpoint, right, where there's 4 names, or what is your middle name? It could vary, but when the system is only set up for 3 names, we use their first, middle, and last, there's going to be problems, when a system doesn't handle accents, right, over names. I mean, the actual technical system doesn't handle it. Well, then how is that going to work, right? And last thing I'd say about that is, in the state of Georgia and many other states, the signature that's on file is the one from the DMV, or the Department of Motor Vehicles. And if you go, if someone gets their driver's license when they're 18 and, now they're 26, I don't sign my name like I did when I was 18. I probably didn't care. Last thing I was thinking about, scribble something on there. Now, if that's going to be used, obviously, when I'm 25 to decide whether that's me or not, votes all over are going to be thrown away. So, these laws are just, they're archaic, and they're insidious, and they're cruel.
Yeah. Yeah. Michael, one final question for you. For those of us that are looking at Georgia from the outside, I'm in Arkansas, Doug's in Minneapolis. We've got people watching and listening that are all over the country, and they see these things and they're, horrified by them. And then they see reports or suggestions that, well, maybe what we ought to do is put pressure on Georgia by boycotting Georgia-based companies. And there is like, okay, if we can push on Coke or Delta to push on the legislature, that can stop these things. Or, the film and television industry, needs to pull out of Georgia. Sporting events need to not be held there until, what's your take on that kind of outside pressure? Is that something that is good? Is that something that, I think I've got the fear that, like, okay, I don't want to hurt Delta employees, by boycotting Delta, what can people on the outside do? People from around the country that care about this and are really kind of in Georgia's corner now as a result of, what happened in 2020. Like, what can we do to be supportive of laws that make it easier for people to vote, not laws that make it harder for people to vote?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Rob. And far too often, Georgia, in my opinion, is in the national news for all the wrong reasons, right? And and it seems that to happen a lot. And so it's infuriating on one hand, because we've got just some really talented people here, great citizens that really want to see really good positive things happen. Georgia, is a very gerrymandered state. So I will say that without the gerrymandering, our elected officials would represent and look much more like the people of Georgia. So I'm happy you talk about the employees, because the one thing we want to keep in mind is that the majority of Georgia voters don't support these type of laws and these bills. And yeah, we don't want to boycott or stop people from coming, hurt Georgia voters. We definitely do not want to do that. And look, we enjoy the film industry being here. We want to remain supportive, and we want Georgia to thrive. So it does help though when the national eyes are on us, and we've kind of gotten used to that now. We like it. We're totally comfortable with it. That's fine. But we do encourage people to keep the pressure on, right? Keep talking about it, using shows like this and venues like this to bring people like myself and others on to talk about the plight of what's going on, continue to raise the awareness. And yes, the pressure can be put on. There's no problem with saying, hey, we have some of the largest brands in the world that are headquartered here in Georgia, and they should know that their consumers from around the country are not happy with what's going on, right? And that doesn't mean boycotting or hurting our workers here. But email and Twitter and social media works very well to get the attention of the CEOs and the board members of companies, because again, these are global organizations. They have constituents, their own customers, right? Their own shareholders that see what's going on. So we encourage people, raise the awareness about what's happening, and by all means, go to social media, go on Twitter, let people know that you're dissatisfied, number one, but you're in our corner, and you're willing to help. And I for one appreciate all the support that we continue to get. During elections is great, right? And we can have people writing postcards and in a COVID-free environment, coming to the state and helping us turn out the vote. But it's just as important when there aren't elections going on, right? And when bills like this are trying to go through, when they're galvanizing around trying to ensure that they're doing everything they can to disenfranchise us, to let them know then, right, that there's eyeballs that are on, and they will face some pressure. Georgia loves to tout, and Governor Deal loves to talk about how Georgia's the number one state to do business in. So it's no doubt how important that is. Agriculture is very important to Georgia. And when those, entities start to feel pressure, social pressure, potentially legal pressure, from what's being done, I think there'd be much more receptive and understanding that we're out of line, right? I mean, the Georgia, when I say we, I mean the Georgia legislature is out of line with what the Republicans are trying to pass through. And when they realize that their support, not only from the voters here in Georgia, but from people across the country, we know we're on the right side of history with this. And we keep that up. Ultimately, I do believe we'll be successful.
Fantastic. Well, we are on your side, Michael, and here to help in any way we can. And I'm sure our listeners feel that way as well. Thank you, my friend, for joining us and shining some light on what's happening in your state that gives us some insight beyond just the headlines. And we really appreciate it. So good to chat with you.
No, thank you, Rob. I appreciate it. Doug's pleasure. Thanks for having me on again. So I hope to see you again soon.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome.
Hey, that does it for us. What a day, Rob, huh? That was great. Woo! That was great. Yeah. And, just to remind all of us that what's going on in Georgia is not just in Georgia. This really is a national effort to try to do this. And the response has to be unified, it seems to me, all across the system. Hey, thanks for paying attention, friends. We're back tomorrow with our Faith Day. It's St. Patrick's Day tomorrow. So get your green on. And we're actually going to be talking about saints and all with Stephanie Spalding, Laura Truax, Dominique Gilliard, myself. So we're back tomorrow. And then again Thursday Friday and give you the weekend off. And then we're back with you Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Happy Politics Day, Robb Ryerson.
You too, Doug Padgett.
Hey, we'll see you all soon.